Welcome to the August 17th meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. My name is Kevin Lynch, I'm president of the club. And please silence your phones. And doing the invocation today is Maggie Harlow. She's co-owner of Cider River downtown. We had a business synergy event there last month. It was great. You hear about these places, and you had great leadership. We're on a tour of the facility. I was very impressed with the quality, the speed, everything. The way their process was quite impressive. But most important thing, though, she's the trainer of Jack Harlow to be a real good rapper. So go ahead and grab the invitation.
Thank you, Kevin. Give me a beat. I picked this invocation today because it felt so appropriate for this group of people who are doers, who are trying to change the world. A blessing for risk takers and failures. This is by Robin Tanner. Today we share a blessing for losers, risk takers, all failures, far and wide. Blessed are they who fall in the mud, who jump with gusto and rip their pants, who skin the elbows and bruise the ego, for they shall know the sweetness of risk. Blessed are they who make giant mistakes, whose intentions are good, but impact has injured, who know the hot sense of regret and ask for mercy, for their hearts will know the gift of forgiveness. Blessed are they who have seen a D or an F or C or any letter less than perfect, who are painfully familiar with the red pen and the labels as less than, for they know the wisdom in the imperfect. Blessed are they who try again, who dust off, who wash up, who extend the wish for peace, who return to sites of failure, who are dogged in their pursuit, for they will discover the secret to dreams. Blessed are they who refuse to listen to the naysayers, for their hearts will be houses for hope. Blessed are they who see beyond the surface of another, for they will be able to delight in the gift of compassion. Blessed are they who stop running the race to help a fellow traveler, who pick up the fallen, who stop for injured life, for they shall know the kindness of strangers. Blessed are they who wildly, boldly abandon winning, for they shall know the path of justice.
Thanks, Maggie. Good job. Appreciate that. And leading us in the four-way test of the pledge is Kevin Fields, CEO and President of Louisville Central Community Center, and he's also a club secretary, club director, and very importantly, he's been the chair of the DEI committee for years now, and he does a whole lot for our club, and also LCCC does a whole lot for our community. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, President Kevin. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. As I prepare to present the pledge and the four-way test, I want to give you just a quick update on behalf of the DEI committee. And doing that, say thank you to this club for supporting the work of the committee. Many of you were there in May of last year when we did the ribbon cutting of the Old Warner Plaza Business Intelligence Center. Since then, we've been focused heavily on providing a wide range of support service in support of minority business development, Rotarian Time Crimmins, and many, many other partners. Time on behalf of SCORE, the SBAs, and all the other support services are working in partnership with us. And so this month of August is Black Business Month, and I want to encourage you to support as many minority, Black and other minority-owned businesses as you can. That's one of the charges for our committee on behalf of this club, is to support that and help to close the wealth gap in the process. Now, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now, the four-way test for what we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Now it's time for guests. Rotarians please introduce yourself first. Walt, you asking something? Please introduce yourself first and then introduce your guest, title, organization, and guest after the meeting, up in the corner, the table is not occupied right now. We have a one-is Rotary thing. You can break for 3 to 5 minutes. We'll learn more about our club. President Kevin.
Yes, I guess you're up there somewhere now. I can see you, Kevin. My guest today is my good friend Bill Lapcheska. Bill is a Rotarian, a visiting Rotarian from Lafayette, Indiana, past president of the Lafayette Rotary Club, and retired CPA, and all-around good guy. And we go around the country together from time to time, visiting other Rotary clubs to get away from our wives when we're on vacation.
President Kevin, I have a guest today. His name is Paul Ransdell. He's the director of Foundation for the Horses, part of the American Equine Association of Practitioners. I think I got that right. Close. All the way from Lexington.
President Kevin, I'm Lori Flannery, President and CEO of New Directions. And my guest today is my husband, Kevin Flannery, formerly of Churchill Downs, who specifically wanted to be here for today's guest. Thank you.
Kevin, you're also a former president as well, by the way. Churchill Downs, but whatever. Any other guests? Okay. As usual, we have a lot of Rotarians in the spotlight. Congratulations to MCM CPAs, corporate members Brad Smith, Mike Bontra, and Steve Carrick. Last week, they joined forces with Cherry Beakart, which is a firm in I think it's in North Carolina, but it's the Southeast region's largest accounting firm. So they're now part of that. Congratulations also to Jeremy Volkurker with Miranda Construction and Jay Mallory with Image Quest. Both companies are on the 2023 Inc. 5000 list. I'd like to introduce Ashley Brower. She's been great. Founder and CEO of Max Strategic Communications. Actually, this year she founded that. Chair of the Speakers Committee and co-chair of the Leadership Fellows Committee. And a very hard-working Rotarian, I can tell you that. But she'll introduce today's speaker. Thanks, Ashley.
Dr. William Farmer is the Equine Medical Director for Churchill Downs Incorporated, tasked with developing, implementing, and enforcing all aspects of equine safety and welfare for the 6 thoroughbred and 3 standardbred racing venues in the CDI racetrack portfolio. Prior to joining the CDI team, Dr. Farmer spent more than a decade as an official veterinarian between the California Horse Racing Board and the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. For the past 13 years, Dr. Farmer has worked with the Breeders' Cup Limited as a member of their dedicated veterinary team for the Breeders' Cup Championships held each year in early November on a revolving basis at a prestigious racetrack around the United States. In 2017, Dr. Farmer had the honor of developing and implementing an out-of-competition testing program for the Breeders' Cup Championship event, which he still coordinates. Dr. Farmer is on the executive board of the International Group of Specialist Racing Veterinarians and serves on the racing committee of the American Association of Equine Practitioners. Please welcome Dr. Farmer.
Thank you all. Such an honor to be here today to be able to speak about something very near and dear to my heart, and that's horse racing. I appreciate everybody taking the time out of your schedules to come here. Very flattered and honored to have guests here, Kevin, to come back as well. So first, I'm going to try to keep this brief. I tend to be long-winded, and I know I'm on a time schedule, so I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can, but I know that there are a lot of questions, a lot of things I'd like to share, so we're going to try to dive right in. I am a transplant to Louisville. I moved here in 2008, just as a little bit of background on myself. My wife is a dentist here in town as well, or just northeast of town. We have 2 children who go to school here. We love Louisville, and Louisville is definitely home for us. So it's been an honor to stay here and to come back to work for Churchill Downs. Interesting part of my story is that 20 years ago when I was sitting in veterinary school, there's no way that I would ever tell you that I would be here at Churchill Downs back then. I was not really interested in horse racing, my hometown. I knew I wanted to be an equine veterinarian. I wanted to do work with horses, but racing was totally foreign to me. I knew nothing about it. If you asked me what happens on the first Saturday in May, I probably couldn't have told you back then. So it was a big learning curve for me when I came to Kentucky in 2008 and fell in love with a side of veterinary medicine that I knew nothing about through school, and that's the regulatory side, the safety and welfare aspect side of veterinary medicine. So we're going to jump through a few things just as a little bit of introduction for me. Hopefully this is going to work. Let's see here. If I click, oh, hang on here.
The backstrike simplification is next, then comes Tis the Bomb, Rich Strike, O'Donegal to the inside, and then the 2 trailers at the backstretch are Barber Road and Happy Jack. That opening half mile was, whoa, blazing fast. 45.36 seconds for Summer Escamaro, who heads up the backstretch in front, with Japan's Crown Pride right alongside, and Messier goes up in between those 2. The pace continues to be hot. Zozos is next after 3/4 in 1 minute 10 and 4/5 seconds, and now Epicenter comes splitting horses and is moving up quickly as Crown Pride takes the lead around the far turn. It is Crown Pride battling with Messier. They're stride for stride. Epicenter and Zozos in behind them. Cybernex sweeps up to the outside. Zagden gets the rail run, and they're into the stretch. And it's Messier, Crown Pride, and Epicenter is coming up on the outside. Epicenter has taken the lead as they arrive into the final furlong. Zagden is coming after him. Epicenter and Zagden, these 2, stride for stride. Simplification down the outside is next. They're coming over the wire. Epicenter, Zagden, Rich Strike is coming up on the inside. Oh my goodness, the longest shot has won the Kentucky Derby.
So that was the 2022 Kentucky Derby when Rich Strike came out of the clouds and won that race. You never hear his name called the entire call. There's nowhere to be seen. If you I pointed out earlier on, he's trailing the field. He's way behind. He went off as the 2nd longest odds in Kentucky Derby history at 80-1. Second only to Donna Rail, who went off at 91-1 back in 1913. So it was a really cool environment to be there on that day as well. And on top of that, not only do you have the long shot win, but we also had the small Kentucky trainer win. Eric Reed was a trainer of Rich Strike, and long-time Kentucky trainer, has a small operation. It was a huge win for Kentucky that day. And so I put that up there just to kind of get us in the mood of the Kentucky Derby, because that's what most of us are familiar with. And now we all know what happens on the first Saturday in May. There we are. Okay, so just talk a little bit about the horse racing industry in Kentucky before we dive into kind of my specific area. The horse industry in Kentucky is very vibrant. We have over 34,000 people that are directly or indirectly involved in the equine sport, and that includes not just thoroughbred racing, but standardbred racing. That's where they sit in the cart behind them and drive them around for those who are not familiar with some of our racing. We have a very vibrant saddlebred industry in the United States. Shelbyville, Kentucky is kind of the national capital for saddlebred horses. And we also have a reviving quarter horse racing circuit that is coming around back into Kentucky. We have a new track being built over in eastern Kentucky. So we have a lot of people who are directly and indirectly involved in this industry. One of the huge things for our economic involvement is the amount of revenue that's generated. We have $115 million in tax revenue that's supplied to the Commonwealth through equine-related operations. There's also looking specifically more at the Derby for Kentucky and what it does for the city of Louisville, has a $396 million impact on our economics here in the city, which is very impactful. That is through the tourism aspect, through all the festivals, everything that is related to the Kentucky Derby within the city of Louisville. It brings in people from all over the world who come to Louisville, Kentucky, specifically on the first Saturday of May to see the Kentucky Derby. But we also race here in Kentucky well beyond the Kentucky Derby. And in Kentucky, we also have a full year-round racing circuit, which we'll discuss here shortly. So here is this is this year, Churchill Downs 2023 Kentucky Derby Day, view from our newest venue that we opened called the First Turn Experience up at the top. It's an absolutely wonderful view of the racetrack. But just to see the crowd of people, some Derby-related stats, just so everybody can take in the depth that the Kentucky Derby brings. On Kentucky Derby Day specifically, we had $288.7 million wagered on our races that we held during that day. Specifically on the Kentucky Derby alone, we had $188.7 million wagered on one race. So nearly 2/3 of that all on the Kentucky Derby itself. We had 150,000 in attendance on Kentucky Derby Day, but not to be foreshadowed was Kentucky Oaks Day. On Friday before that, we had 106,000 that came into attendance. So outside of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and there are a couple of, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway holds the highest level of attendance in the world for a singular sporting event. We are the top rated, the Kentucky Derby is the top rated spectator sport in the United States outside of a motor speedway. And we're very proud of that. It's a huge accomplishment for everything that has happened at Churchill Downs. And as we go into Derby 150 coming up next year, something that we're very proud of the spectacle of Kentucky Derby and everything that surrounds it. Some other fun facts. Should be clicking as we're going. There's our numbers. Another fun fact. 120,000 mint juleps served on Kentucky Derby Day. This sounds like a lot. This includes 10,000 bottles of Old Forester bourbon, 60,000 pounds of ice, and over 1,000 pounds of mint to make that. And I will say that they are free, but we all know they're not free. But with our all-inclusive packages now at Kentucky Derby, during the Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby Day, everything is cashless. So it's an all-inclusive event. So those 120,000 mint juleps went around the property on that day. All right, so to discuss really what I do for Churchill Downs and my role with Churchill Downs is the most important thing about the Kentucky Derby, and that's horse health and safety. We've gone through a number of changes in the racing industry. We've been in the spotlight numerous times for good things and bad things. And one of the challenges when I came to Churchill Downs was to help us as a company become united and work with our colleagues around the industry to raise the level of integrity, raise the safety bars, and to overall enhance our sport through veterinary medicine. This really started, the biggest change that most of us will know started in 2008. Kevin, you were there in 2008. 8 bells, and Big Brown. Big Brown won, big giant gelding who won, and then 8 bells, which was a filly who was catastrophically injured after the race. She ran second. It was my 4th day on the job. I was working for the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission then. And that is what sealed the deal for me. It was a horrible thing. It was absolutely horrible, but I knew as a veterinarian we could have a significant impact on how this plays out for our industry. That started the wheels of change. We started to see a number of medication regulations that changed. Churchill Downs started their start to finish program in 2009, which was industry leading with regards to some of the safety initiatives that went in kind of behind the scenes before these horses ever get to the racetrack. Things that we can do to help ensure that the horses that go to the racetrack are as safe as possible. The protocols are in place to make sure that the safeguards are followed and that these horses are racing to the best of their natural ability. 2012 brought around another kind of catastrophic moment for our industry, and that was at Aqueduct in New York. There's a rash of injuries that happened there, and again, some significant changes came out of that unfortunate incident. In 2016, I started doing some work for the California Horse Racing Board in Southern California, working at Santa Anita, Del Mar, Los Alamitos in the Southern Circuit. And in 2019, if anybody is a casual racing fan, probably heard of some of the events that went on at Santa Anita, where they again had a rash of injuries tied to a specific racetrack in a relatively short period of time. It was the first 3 months of 2019. I was there as a commissioned veterinarian and working through this with track management, with my colleagues as veterinary practitioners, and the regulatory body being the California Horse Racing Board. And throughout this time period, there had been a number of initiatives in federal legislation to try to come up with a federal oversight for horse racing. One of the issues with us in horse racing is that we're individually regulated. So the rules in Kentucky are different than that side of the river. They're different than Ohio. They're different than Illinois, where we have other big racing jurisdictions. They're different than California. And so we had no uniformity. And so there was a big push that started to create national uniformity for our industry because we desperately needed it. That started to take hold around 2010, 2012, never really gained a hold until 2020, which was when the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act was passed by then President Trump in December of 2020. It was the first time we had national legislation that superseded any kind of state jurisdictional regulation. It's taken a while for that to get into effect and for the rollout, and it hasn't been perfect. But we are on a road to a better regulatory structure for horse racing. For the first time, we have standardized racetrack safety measures. So this includes surface, where we have standardized testing protocols and objectives for surface management, because a consistent racing surface is nearly the #1 thing for horse racing to help our horses stay safe. Veterinary responsibilities, so individuals like myself, I have several esteemed colleagues that are in kind of this management role where we are overseeing different properties, working with our individual state jurisdictions, state veterinarians, to increase and standardize processes to make sure that horses are being, the heightened level of veterinary scrutiny is placed on these horses, as well as jockey safety. Because every time we run a horse race, there are an equal number of humans that are at risk as we have horses, because each one of them are usually guided by a rider on their back, assuming that they haven't fallen off throughout the race. But another big key of this is anti-doping testing. Just as safe, there are a lot of safety measures that we have, but anti-doping is also equally important. And this is kind of threefold. First is we want to make sure that horses are running to the true natural ability, so they're not running on any type of performance enhancing or performance detracting or limiting type medications that could affect an outcome of a race. As well as the betting public, because if anyone in here has ever bet on a horse race before, you're taking your own hard-earned money, you're looking at a program, you do your own handicapping on who you think is going to win that race, and you are expecting that that horse is going to run to the best of its natural ability, based on the PPs, the past performances of that horse in previous races. Throughout this anti-doping testing, there are a select number of horses, always a winner, other horses out of the race, as well as out of competition testing, where we're looking at these horses away from the race itself. We're screening on upwards of 1,500 different medications. This is a very in-depth, very deep process. It is not the same as if we go to the lab and want to get a white cell count, or a CBC. If you go to the lab and routine blood work, this is very scientific, very laborsome work to be done. But it is necessary for our industry because the horses cannot speak to us directly, and this is a way that we can help regulate that. So one of the things then that brings us to kind of to date of 2023, unless you are not from Louisville and don't follow horse racing at all, obviously in 2023 we had a rough year at Churchill Downs specifically that was highlighted during Derby Week. It was a very tough week for all of us. And as we try to answer some questions, and what we do know, what we hear a lot is that these things are multifactorial. The situation that we went through is not singular in nature, but there are a lot of pieces of the puzzle. And so we have to try to pick that puzzle apart backwards to try to figure out where we can work to make our horses even safer and do even more to improve the integrity and the safety of our race. Our horses deserve it, and that is my charge, that's my goal. We had a cluster of 12 injuries, catastrophic injuries at Churchill Downs over about a 5-week span, which ultimately led to us moving racing away from Churchill Downs to a property that we own here in Kentucky, Ellis Park, which was the natural progression of racing anyways. We have a year-round racing circuit here in Kentucky. So 365 days out of the year, we have racing, not every day, but throughout within the week, we have racing at a thoroughbred facility within Kentucky. And so traditionally around the 4th of July, it transitions from Churchill Downs to Ellis Park, which is in Henderson, Kentucky. This year, that was a little bit accelerated. We could get the horses there. We had some work that we needed to do on our side, and we allowed the economic driver of horse racing in the state to continue by shifting into Ellis Park, and that was a huge success. We've had a very successful meet there. We actually have 2 more weeks of racing left at Ellis Park before racing then shifts to South Central Kentucky at Kentucky Downs. So let me, sorry, I clicked one too early here. Let me talk a little bit about the Kentucky, our safety program that we have here in Kentucky specifically. I just mentioned we have the year-round circuit. Every horse that races in Kentucky has to go through multiple veterinary exams before they ever get to the racetrack. We require a pre-work exam, so horses that are in training, they typically have a high-speed work once a week if they're not racing. They're required, we have a mandated veterinary exam prior to that horse having that high-speed work. What initially started as a house rule that we created at Churchill Downs, which was then adopted by the state as regulation, was a pre-entry exam. So every horse that goes to be entered into a race has to have a private veterinarian examine that horse before it's ever eligible to even be entered. On race day, every horse in this state, every horse, every race, every time, has a pre-race entry exam done by a Kentucky State veterinarian, a Kentucky Horse Racing Commission veterinarian. And they are the third non-biased. They don't work for trainers, they don't work for the racetrack. They are our regulators as Churchill Downs, they regulate us. But they are the true non-biased voice for the horse. And that is the role that I worked from 2008 through 2016. I have a esteemed colleague here, Maddie Jackson, who works in my office. We do an entry review on every horse that enters at our Churchill property. That's something that we do specifically. So for example, today we're taking entries at Presque Isle Downs in Erie, Pennsylvania, another one of our tracks. And so we're reviewing every horse that goes in to enter to make sure that we don't identify any risk factors solely on paper. All I have to work with is paper, obviously. I'm not in Erie to go look at the horses, but based on paper risk factors, so that if we can identify any irregularities, any kind of issue that might require some veterinary intervention, we have time to do that. We're entering 7 days out, or approximately 7 days out. So the horse enters today, he's not going to race for approximately a week. So we have time to answer questions, have veterinary exams done, to make sure that we're comfortable with the horse racing on our surfaces. On race day, there are numerous veterinarians on the racetrack. I'll use the highlight of Kentucky Derby Day. We had upwards of 15 veterinarians that are working for the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission in one way or another that are spaced around the racetrack. From the time the horses ever put their first foot onto the racetrack coming over from the backside for the walkover until the last horse leaves the test barn after the race, which is where the winner goes, and the Kentucky Derby, the top 4 or 5 horses go to have anti-doping testing done. There's a wide, large, vast number of veterinarians who are involved in this process to make sure that we have eyes and ears and visual on these horses as much as entirely possible throughout their entire experience at the racetrack. But we need to do more, and we're doing more. The advancement of veterinary medicine to help us identify at-risk horses is a rapidly growing area of racing. And it's something that we need to do for our horses and for our industry. About a year ago, we started in conversations with Haggard-Davidson Medical Institute over in Lexington, probably one of the world's top 2 equine hospitals in the world. And we wanted to figure out how we could bring some new technologies to Churchill Downs specifically, but for our horsemen to have advanced opportunity to help identify at-risk horses. And this is where the discussion of the PET machine came in, which is the positron emission tomography. Some of you in this room may have had a PET scan done before. It's used in the human world for a variety of different things such as heart disease, cancer screenings, and a lot of brain issues. The PET machine allows us to do functional imaging rather than structural imaging. So structural imaging is, say you go get an x-ray. You fall, you break your arm, and you go and have an x-ray. That's structural. We see the actual structure of your bone, and the surgeon or doctors can come up with a program or a treatment plan to address that specific issue. PET machine looks at functional. So we're looking at a cellular level. So the image that you see on your right, and let's see, am I able to get that to play? There's a little play button. If you can scroll down, I may not be able to do it. There you go. If you click on that play button. Thank you. So this is the front leg of a horse. You can see his foot down below, and then his ankle. This is the entire limb. But what we're seeing there is not tendons, bone. Those are cells that are lit up with a radioactive isotope that's administered to the horse. It's a very short-lived radioactive isotope that emits an image, or that emits radiation that is picked up by a camera, basically, that forms this 3D image. So we're seeing this at a cellular level, how this animal is responding. This precedes any type of structural differences that we might see. So things that are stress related, you think of, take the high school athlete who gets shin splints. You know, if you go take x-rays of the football players, we're getting back into football season, and they start to get shin splints, and you can start to see the remodeling on their shins. We have the same thing in the horses. But this precedes any kind of structural thing that you see, because those cells have to react and adapt or not adapt, and that's why we see changes. So this is up and coming technology. This was first developed in 2019. We are the second racetrack to have this on the track. First east of the Mississippi. Santa Anita is the only other racetrack in the country currently to have one permanently housed on the racetrack. So this was a huge advancement, and this started well before what we went through in May. This started over a year ago. We started these processes. So we're super excited to have this at Churchill Downs for our horses, this incredibly cool piece of diagnostic equipment. The last area that I'll discuss as I wrap up here is wearable technology. Believe it or not, we all have wearable technology. We carry it with us every day. It's this. There are so many accelerometers in these little phones anymore. They tell us where we've been, how fast we've walked, how many steps we've taken, the barometer outside. There's so much that can get compacted into a cell phone. We are at a point in the horse racing world that we need to go to wearable technology, and we're getting there. I was recently at a conference 2 weeks ago, and I learned this about the NFL. The average NFL player wears anywhere from 4 to 8 sensors on them at every game. I did not know that. They wear them in their cleats, they've got them in their shoulder pads, they have them in their helmets. There actually is one in the football. So it's highly advanced, and it's an area that we know very little about. If you go to the racetrack and you want to identify a horse that's at risk, we typically use the jog. We jog a horse in hand. That's how we identify lameness in horses. What we don't know is when this horse is traveling 40 miles an hour, what does that look like? You can ask a jockey. You can ask Johnny Velasquez or Edgar Prado, any of the world famous jockeys. How did he feel? He felt good. No, he didn't feel so good. That's all they know. You're traveling 40 miles an hour. At 40 miles an hour, a horse's foot is on the ground for about 1/100 of a second. The human brain is incapable of comprehending some information, data at that kind of speed. But a sensor isn't. The sensor on the left, we did a pilot study. Again, this started well over a year ago. We started to develop a study with Washington State University. It was funded by the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, where all of our horses this spring at Churchill Downs wore this sensor. Somewhat serendipitous with the events that we went through. But we have a lot of data information where we've never had data information before, and it's objective. Because the same thing is, you ask the trainer, the trainers are out on the rail every morning watching their horses work. You ask him, the owner says, hey, how did my horse work? He worked good. He worked this far, this fast, galloped out strong. But if that horse were to have shortened his stride by 1 inch, over a mile race, we're talking lengths and distance. And if he shortened his stride by 1 inch because something hurts or something doesn't feel comfortable, that's their mechanism. We limp. That's the horses limp at high speed, as they shorten their stride. They try to figure out whatever hurts they want to avoid. And so what we're able to do with the sensor that captures data in 3 directions, so up, down, left, right, forward, and back, at 800 hertz. So we're getting 2,400 pieces of data every second. So we have a lot to, we still have to figure out what all this means. But the future is really, really bright. And that was part of our study at Churchill this spring. We worked with a company called StrideSafe, who has kind of developed the algorithms behind this, and we're trying to develop some protocols so that we have the ability to identify these horses before they ever get to the race. And if there are things that can be done, we can have veterinary involvement, have some interaction, which will be a game changer for us, because everybody talks about wanting to get horse racing fatalities to a 0. There's inherent risk with no matter what we do. We walk down the sidewalk, there's risk. You drive your car, there's risk. There's risk with horse racing. But this type of diagnostic imaging, this type of sensor, wearable type sensors, is going to get us as close as possible to that 0 number. Super excited about it. A lot more to come regarding both diagnostic imaging and the sensors. But it's the future for horse racing. It's a space that we have no objective data on. So super, super excited about that. With that, I have used up all of my allotted time, and certainly happy to answer any kind of questions or concerns. Nothing too hard, nothing too tough. So I know there's all kinds of good questions out there. Happy to entertain any questions.
Before we go to the question in the back there, I got one question first. Well, I was very impressed with how, when they had the trouble with, horses basically dying, they reacted very quickly to sending them to Ellis Park, and most companies would take a long time to make that decision. Talk about kind of the culture of the company, the leadership, the values, and how they work together and how they were able to quickly realize they have to do the right thing.
Yeah, so the events there at the end of May through the 1st of June were very challenging. We were in a very, very fortunate stance that we owned Ellis Park. And horse racing in the state is a huge economic driver. There are a lot of people who make their living, who depend on racing for their living. And so if we were to have just stopped racing without being able to have an alternative, would have been a huge negative impact from an economic standpoint for the approximately 600 people who live on the backside of Churchill Downs, our grooms, our hot walkers. And these are not high dollar glorified jobs. These are the guys who are rubbing down horses, cleaning stalls every day. There are a lot of people who depend on a steady racing circuit to live. And so when we started to weigh our options, we had gone through numerous rounds of surface testing at Churchill Downs. We had 3 or 4 times, depending on how far you would look at that window. We had different experts out to the track who did a variety of testing on the surface. We felt very confident the surface was not the issue. We had a really good surface. But we knew that for our industry, we could not continue down this road. We needed to change that narrative for those who live and work at Churchill Downs, and we had the option just to bump that up to go to Ellis Park. So for us, it was really a no-brainer. We had turf surface, so those guys who wanted to race their horses on the grass still had that option. The racing surface at Ellis Park is an awesome surface. Our Kentucky horsemen love it for their 2-year-olds. We have a lot of 2-year-olds that go over there because it's a wonderful surface. So it was getting the logistics of anything we did. It was the logistics, because we went from a track that was not planning to race for 5 weeks, and in 4 days we went from 0 to 60. And so it was a madhouse. It was crazy, but awesome staff over there, and we were able to basically move on like nothing ever happened with regards to horse racing. We were allowed to, one day we stopped at Churchill, the following Saturday we started at Ellis Park with a successful racing product.
That was impressive.
Yes?
In sports, we have football, basketball, basketball, we have a referee or an umpire, and he calls the play right away. Now, you took 20 minutes to tell me the 150,000 people saw the race and that horse didn't win. Now, it's with all this technology you got, I don't see how you can justify that. You sure ruined my thinking.
So We're going back to, that would be what, the Derby of 2019 when Country House and, yes, when there was the reversal of stewards. So on the racetrack, we have 3 judges that, they're called stewards on the racetrack, and they are the ones who make those kind of calls. They sit in a room, they do all the replays. I can tell you that a lot has changed since then, because there is a lot that comes down to, there is a lot of subjectivity when you're reviewing a race. I would never want to be in their seat, because they literally deal with making the disqualification in the Kentucky Derby, but it also, if you have 2 grooms who get in a fight on the backside, that's who hears it. They literally hear everything from top to bottom on the racetrack. If we as a racetrack want to change stuff, our first part is if we want to adjust a post time, we go to the stewards. So we have to have a really good working relationship, but I can tell you that much like NFL or any other sports program has gone through, the use of video has become huge. Del Mar, Southern California has gone, they have a drone that follows every race every day, and the view is amazing. And I think we're getting there. That's one of my big pushes for Churchill, is I think we need to have a drone with our races, because that is a view that can stick with the horse. Inevitably, the bad thing happens during the race right as cameras are switching. It's not in good view of this camera, and it's switching to this camera, and it's not quite there yet. But having a drone type view, also with the sensors, we have a lot more data that can be collected. We're not there yet, but there are things from the data that can say, hey, this horse had a change in stride. He got hit hard enough, it changed his stride, and that could be grounds for, you know, some type of the disciplinary actions that they have. So, hope that kind of answered your question. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your. This was fascinating. Got a question. I'm going to start off by saying there's some nefarious bicycle riders in the Tour de France, right? And they're always trying to stay one step ahead of testing for doping. Maybe we have some trainers like that, maybe we don't. But what can you do? The technology here is really cool, but folks trying to just stay one step ahead, and the animal welfare is just, I know you're all for that, but what can you do?
Yeah, so as in every walk of life, you always have that, you know, the rules are written for the minority, not the majority. We have the same thing in horse racing. There are the very, very small number of bad actors. A lot of times, which is frustrating from my point, we hear about doping in horse racing. Over 85% of the time, those are overages of therapeutic medications. So that is, in my mind, that's wrong, and they should be punishable, but that's very different than doping. Doping is purposeful. Doping is trying to gain an advantage or cause someone to have a disadvantage, not someone's poor management. Over-medication or overage of a therapeutic medication is someone's poor management, or a groom didn't realize the horse was in and he gave him, you know, the medication, some therapeutic medication, and it was an accident. So there's a very big distinction. I think a lot of times they get lumped under with doping. But to that point, one of the big things that I've been fortunate enough with the Breeders' Cup is to develop our out-of-competition testing protocol. So using cycling as an example, out-of-competition is huge in the cycling world. They have to check in. There are a lot of checks and balances in the cycling world, because you guys know how to evade testing, and horse racing is no different. Guys try very hard, and so it's coming up with creative plans, using intelligence, ground-based intelligence. I think the most recent response to that is in 2020, March of 2020, we had a very large federal investigation that just saw its last person sentenced a couple weeks ago. A number of standardbred trainers, there were some prominent thoroughbred trainers that were indicted through New York in a federal court case where there was alleged doping and confirmed doping. And so it takes that kind of investigation, because the reality is the testing that we do, we test for known substances. We have this 1,500 different substances that we're looking for, but we have to know them. Another really good example is maybe back in 2012, we had a drug called dermorphin. It was frog juice on the racetrack. And no one had ever heard of it. There were no tests for it. It comes from some frog out of the Amazon forest. All of a sudden in Louisiana, someone found it. It got out, word got out they were using this. It's 1,000 times more potent than morphine. But we didn't even know it existed. So there's stuff like, we're always chasing those types of things, and we have some groups some industry organizations, that's really their charge in our industry, is to keep the pulse on what's happening in the background, and to be able to quickly and tactfully have testing arranged and available, and the science to go into developing those tests to help identify those substances. Because once they developed the test, they went back. In fact, I can't remember the exact year, but we went back. We keep all of the Kentucky Derby samples, and Dr. Mary Spillane was the Equine Medical Director for Kentucky. We actually went backwards and tested all the Kentucky Derby and Oak samples that year, just to make sure we didn't have a problem. And this was, I want to say, September, well after the Kentucky Derby, unless it was Derby of 2020. So, it was well after all of that. So it was it's always a cat and mouse game.
Thank you so much for all your work on prevention of injuries. This is wonderful. But could you speak to any improvements or what you're doing once an injury happens? It's so distressing to see a horse go down. Is there anything that can be done when they're injured to not have to end their life?
Yes. So thank you for the question. And that obviously is something that is very, very challenging. And the horse itself has some very unique physical characteristics that make certain things very, very challenging. And the biggest of that is horses have to be equally weight-bearing on all four limbs pretty much 24 hours a day. Unlike a human, a dog, a cat, whatever other animal, you can remove a limb, and on a dog or cat, I'm sure you've seen three-legged dogs or cats, they get hit by a car, they remove a limb, they act just fine. They get around on three legs just fine and live very happy lives. Horses are very, very different. They have to, because of their circulation, they have to be equally weight-bearing on all four limbs. So whatever we do to help a horse survive, whatever kind of surgery procedure is done, we have to have good assurances that when we're through that period, that we're able to have a horse they don't have to be necessarily sound or come back to racing, but they have to be able to ambulate around a pasture, be healthy and able to walk on all four legs equally. And that is usually the biggest driving factor on as what we have for outcomes for different types of injuries that occur on the racetrack. I will tell you that there has been huge advances in surgery when it comes to formerly catastrophic injuries, where we are able to reconstruct some limbs, put some things back together, and let the horse really try to tell us, because these horses are amazing creatures. Everybody talks about how small their ankles are. You'll see all the negative, all these 1,100 pounds running on ankles no bigger than ours, and they have thin legs, but they're meant to run. That's why they're that way. They don't have big bulky legs to try to run 40 miles an hour. But we have got the science behind how to use that to our advantage and use their body structure to our advantage to help give us the best opportunity to allow for a successful outcome. We brought in a surgeon this past spring when we were going through everything in Churchill, because I wanted our guys to understand that there were things that sometimes can't be done. It's on a limited basis, but can be done. Brought in a surgeon from California, Dr. Ryan Carpenter, who's probably the premier reconstructive orthopedic surgeon for racetrack catastrophic injuries in the United States. And he's got videos and videos of horses that he has done surgery on that are now galloping around a pasture. And so there are limitations, but there are a lot of new science advances, surgical. We take a lot from the human orthopedic world, and we got to make it into a horse, because the horse orthopedic economic factor is very different than the human orthopedic economics. So when it comes to developing screws and titanium plates, there's a lot more research in the human world than there is in the equine world. So what we have to do is kind of work backwards. We take the human product and we have to upgrade it to make it to a horse product.
Time for one more question.
Final question, okay. My question is in regards to the 2023 favorite of the Kentucky Derby, Forte. He was scratched kind of towards getting close to the race. Yeah. So I'm just curious how that situation was brought to your attention and the discussions that you and your team had, and how that decision was made to scratch him for his health reasons.
Certainly, and I will pull in another. So in my role, that is regulation in Kentucky. All the pre-race exams are done by the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission veterinarians. So they're the ones who do those pre-race exams in the morning. So in my role with Churchill, I had nothing to do with the Forte decision. I was not involved. That was a Kentucky Horse Racing Commission veterinary decision, certainly supported it, had some questions about it in the past, but I did not get directly involved. But I will tell you that 2014, I was involved in a race morning scratch, a horse named International Star for trainer Mike Maker, that I scratched out of the Kentucky Derby that morning. And it is a decision that is very difficult to make, but yet it's a very easy decision to make because the horse comes first. If you are going out for the biggest day of your career as a 3-year-old colt in Kentucky, that's on Kentucky Derby Day, if you're going to go out there and do the best that you possibly can, if there is any kind of ailment that would preclude you from being able to do that, why would you want to race? Why would you risk it? And if that animal on our exams, speaking from a regulatory side, as we do our exams, if there are reasons that we believe that there is some type of unknown or a hidden injury or unknown injury or acute injury, it's amazing that horses, they'll find some little thing to be crazy, be silly, where they've tweaked something, they bruised something, nothing catastrophic in nature, but on that particular day, at that particular time, in the best interest of the horse, they're not fit to race. And so, and that's for the betting public as well, because guaranteed he was a morning line favorite. So if we know in the racing world that this horse is not able to perform at his peak level, but we have $188 million being wagered on the Kentucky Derby, if we send that out there to the general public, it's not going to be sent out there that, oh, he's got a foot bruise, he's probably not going to run as well today. And so that totally underruns the Derby. And so there's twofold. The Kentucky Racing Commission is twofold. Horse safety and welfare, but betting public as well. And so you have to weigh both of those sides. Those decisions are not easy to make. They're not fun. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, an incredible amount of money usually that goes into getting a horse to the Kentucky Derby, because we have roughly 20-something thousand foals born in Kentucky every year, and 20 of them hopefully get to the Kentucky Derby. So your odds are very stacked against you because you have one time. The Kentucky Derby is for colts. You can be a filly and run in the Kentucky Derby. It's been done. It's been won by a filly. Genuine Risk, 1980.
It was a challenge at the Preakness.
So it can be done, but you only get that one shot. The Derby only comes around once, and that's a really pivotal moment for most horses in their career. And so the decision on whether or not to let a horse run, and I'll be honest, it's not just the Kentucky Derby. It's the 5,000 claimer that we run 3 weeks after the Kentucky Derby. That horse is just as important as Forte is, or any other horse. So it's, for us as regulatory veterinarians, yes, we have the media presence around the big days. That's great because it's good for our sport, but the decision-making process is the same. And the example I usually use is the Kentucky Derby or 11 o'clock at night in Turfway Park when we were running in the middle of the winter and it's 10 degrees outside. So that horse is just as valuable to me. It may have a different financial value to someone, but to me as a veterinarian, that horse is equally as important.
Just one comment. The reason I remember Genuine Risk 1980, I went to the Preakness that year, and there was a dispute on whether the Genuine Risk had won the race or not won the race, depending upon some ruling, And about 3 or 4 days later, I'm out at some bar, and I hear these people next door just yelling at each other. It was a bump, no, it wasn't a bump. Arguing. I said, I was at the race. I didn't see a bump. I told you so. I said, but I was in the infield, I didn't see anything. I didn't have the video monitors then. One more thing for you, Will, before we let you go. In the spirit of gambling, and we try to make this clean, we just reach in line. We've got Delena's volunteered a bunch of books. She's going to recycle these one at a time, so whoever gets this raffle gets to choose any one of those books. So go ahead and make it. We'll get back to you in about 20 minutes. Is that okay? 2008? That was the year you moved here, right? It was, yes. That's amazing. Nobody's here from 2008? Need to be present to win, go ahead. By the way, there's the last 4 numbers that we were here in 2008. 2072, the last 2 numbers, last 4 numbers. What's going on? I'm wondering, do people need glasses to be able to read the numbers? 2061 is the winning one. There we go. Terry, come on. Thanks a lot, Bill. That was really impressive explanation. Yeah, our scheduled speaker next week, don't forget, next week we're back at the University Club. And it's the Attorney General, Republican nominee for governor, Daniel Cameron. We're lucky to get him. We also have questions going to be submitted to that by Tuesday of next week. So make sure, if you have questions for next week's speaker, Daniel Cameron, make sure you get them to Ashley by next Tuesday. And then Governor Beshear is speaking not on Thursday, but on Tuesday, the week of September, well, actually, the week after the holiday. So September 5th, Tuesday, December 5th, the governor will be speaking to us, and we're not going to meet on Thursday that week. So questions for Governor Beshear's speaking while time need to be submitted by September 1st. So mark those two in the calendar. Don't forget, we're back at the University Club. And guests, please meet Craig Sherman in the back, as I said, for a brief overview of the club, 3 or 4 minutes. But really appreciate you, Will, and everyone else. Good meeting. Thank you.